Have you ever heard someone say that Jones isn't a Welsh surname? Jones is the most common surname in Wales. In the early 1800s, 14% of people had that surname, and still today it's the most common surname in the country. But having made several videos on Welsh surnames, I've seen this comment quite a lot. And while it sounds kinda silly, it actually brings up some interesting questions about the Welsh language. So today we're going to talk about Welsh surnames and the history of the Welsh language. So why is it that some people say that Jones, the most ubiquitous Welsh surname, is not Welsh? Well, they claim that Jones can't be a Welsh surname for the simple fact that the Welsh alphabet doesn't have the letter J. I normally see this in reference to the name Jones, but there's actually quite a few typical Welsh surnames that start with the letter J. James is a relatively common Welsh J surname. In the early 1800s, it was most commonly found in South Wales, being most concentrated around the county border of Pembrokeshire and Cardiganshire. On the other hand, there were virtually no Jameses at all in North Wales. Here's an example of a James family from mid-Cardiganshire. In the late 1700s, James Jones had a son named Evan. Evan's full name, in some early 19th century records, was Evan James Jones, but by the time of the 1841 census, he was known just as Evan James. And James was the surname that passed down generation after generation from there on. These Jameses were typical of the rural Welsh farming class. Some were farm laborers, some tenant farmers, and others were merchants. As you may have noticed, Evan James's father was a Jones. That's because James, like Jones, and many other Welsh surnames, was a patronymic surname. So Evan took his father's first name on as his hereditary surname, which continued down the generations unchanged. Another Welsh patronymic J-name was Jeremy. One Jeremy family from Abergwili, near Carmarthen, has ties by marriage to a very distant part of my own family tree, through the Reverend John Jeremy, who was born around 1782. He was the minister of Caironin Unitarian Chapel near Lampeter. And among his descendants were Hannah Jeremy, who was a private teacher and schoolmistress in different parts of South Wales, Walter David Jeremy, a Unitarian minister and solicitor in London, and Reverend Daniel Davis Jeremy, another Unitarian minister in Dublin. Some of their other descendants had different surnames, but kept Jeremy as a middle name, including Walter Jeremy Evans, the headmaster of the Carmarthen Presbyterian College, and Reverend John Jeremy Thomas, rector of Casgob in Pembrokeshire. The Jeremy family had deep roots in Carmarthenshire and was intertwined with the educational and religious life of Wales and other parts of the UK and Ireland in the 19th century. Other Welsh J surnames include John, Johns, Jonathan, Jacob, Joseph, and Jenkins. The thing that these names all have in common is that they don't originate from the Welsh language. In fact, very few Welsh surnames do. However, each one of these names became surnames in Wales due to the unique Welsh experience of the transition from patronymic surnames to hereditary surnames. But are these Welsh surnames actually not Welsh due to a lack of a J in the Welsh alphabet? Well, the funny thing is that there is a J in the Welsh alphabet. So the Welsh alphabet has 29 letters, and it uses the same Latin script as English does. But there are some major differences between Welsh and English. Unlike English, Welsh has 7 vowels, which include A, E, I, O, U, W, and Y. There are also all of these double letters called digraphs, and these represent the sounds th as in the, f as in for, th as in thing, and f also as in for. These sounds also appear in English, but in Welsh it's just that they have their own letter. But there are other sounds in Welsh that don't appear in English at all, and are represented by the letters ch, ng, r, and s. And then in the English alphabet, there are letters that Welsh doesn't have, including K, Q, V, X, and Z. But one letter that both alphabets do have is the letter J. So if J is one of the letters in the Welsh alphabet, and there are lots of J surnames in Wales, then what are people talking about when they say Jones isn't a Welsh surname because there's no J in the Welsh alphabet? Well, what's fascinating about the Welsh language is that the modern Welsh alphabet is only one of many that has been used throughout history. Here's some examples of historic alphabets taken from Morris Jones's 1913 Welsh grammar. The earliest account of the Welsh alphabet comes from the Red Book Grammar. And as you can see, it includes K, Q, X, and it only has a single digraph. Sir J. Pryce's alphabet from 1546 looked like this, and included more attention to the Welsh digraphs, including this version of the th, a new spelling for and the letter r. Other experimental letters from the 16th century include D, L, and U, all with these little dots beneath them to denote the sounds th, and u. New uses for the letter H in the following digraphs, including BH, DH, GH, GHH, LH, MH, NH, and this curious symbol. There have been many experiments in how to write Welsh throughout the years. The interesting thing is that Welsh has existed as a written language for a very, very long time, and far earlier than the earliest surviving examples of the Welsh alphabet. The earliest Welsh manuscripts come from the 13th century, like the Black Book of Carmarthen or the Laws of Hywel Dda. And scholars agree that some parts of these ancient books are copied from even earlier literature, dating back as far as the 6th century. And across these many centuries, the language has gone through many changes, which is normal, since languages naturally change over the years as people use them. But the process of language standardization, which entails coming to an agreement about codifying the proper ways to speak and write, didn't really take hold with Welsh until the 20th century. And it's a complicated process which always reflects the historical and political conditions of society at the time. There was a sort of standardized Welsh language all the way back in medieval ages. Poets learned a literary form of Welsh through the bardic guilds, which trained them to work in the courts of the rulers and nobility. But in the centuries since then, that standard fell out of use due to changes in fashion, in the Welsh political structure, and in the role of poetry and writing in society. Standardization in the more modern sense of having one unified language that a nation of people spoke and wrote started to become a concern during the Renaissance of the 16th century. There was a real fascination at that time in the scholarly investigation of languages beyond Latin, the so-called vernacular languages. These included languages like Italian, English, and French, and in Wales, scholars were working toward what they saw as perfecting the Welsh language by bringing it into these wider scholarly conversations. The spread of the printing press added some urgency to the issue of standardization too, because if you wanted to print literature in the Welsh language, which happened for the very first time in 1546, you need to decide on what letters you're going to use, and you need to know how words are spelled. And up to that point, the issue wasn't settled, and different scholars had different ideas about what to do. For example, one Welsh Renaissance scholar, William Salisbury, argued that written Welsh should look like written Latin, which was for many hundreds of years a language that carried a lot of prestige. So he created this spelling system that kept the spirit of Latin, but he also ended up creating a written Welsh that was virtually unintelligible to Welsh speakers. The next period of interest in standardization came about in the 18th century, with the Welsh literary and cultural revival. Welsh scholars were rediscovering the Welsh literary tradition of medieval times, and they were searching out old manuscripts. And a lot of this enthusiasm centered on the question of who are the Welsh, and they looked to build a Welsh national identity through their work. One of the important figures in this cultural revival movement was Iolo Morgannwg. Morgannwg was an antiquarian, a collector of ancient manuscripts, and a poet from Glamorganshire. He did a lot of work toward the preservation of Welsh manuscripts and all things Celtic. The kind of national identity that he wanted to create was one rooted in the idea of Welsh people being the native Britons, and in the long tradition of bardic literature. One thing that he published was an alphabet, which he called the Coelbren y Beirdd, which he said he found in the margins of various ancient manuscripts. This bardic alphabet was so influential it is even referenced in recent Welsh grammars like the 1996 Gramadeg y Gymraeg. The funny thing, though, is that Morgannwg's bardic alphabet was a complete forgery, as were many of the ancient manuscripts that he published. Because of his desire to reconstruct an unbroken tradition from the medieval bards to the present, when he encountered gaps, he would fill them in with his own creations. His forgeries were so good that it took many, many years before they were even found out. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the standardization of the Welsh language started to come to a resolution, and again the social and political circumstances played an important role, but had changed from earlier time periods. Welsh at this time was on a rapid decline. The 1891 census, which was the first to record language data in Wales, showed that only 30.4% of people in Wales were monolingual Welsh speakers, which was probably an overestimation. 24.1% were bilingual in Welsh and English, and 45.5% of people in Wales spoke English only. The number of monolingual speakers and Welsh speakers as a whole continued to decline until relatively recently. The major concern of the early 20th century when it comes to language standardization was disentangling the Welsh language from the English language. So that meant purging the language of English loanwords, and, in the words of Professor John Morris Jones, making the Welsh language reflect how an intelligent, unassuming Welshman might speak. Morris Jones was the first professor of Welsh language and literature at the University College of North Wales in Bangor, and he took the lead on standardization at this time. While he had a deep respect for the bards of old, similar to the previous generations of language scholars, he took more seriously the authority of native monolingual Welsh speakers. From this perspective, some scholars have argued that the letter J doesn't belong in the Welsh alphabet because there is no basis for its existence in the natural way Welsh is spoken. They argue that it's only found in English loanwords, so in the interest of keeping Welsh untainted from English influence, it should be excluded. In Peter Wynne Thomas's 1996 Gramadeg y Gymraeg, he writes that most of the words that use J in Welsh are ones that are adopted from the English language. Examples include jeans and jersey, but Thomas also noted that the J sound does actually occur in the Welsh language. Regionalisms such as jowl for devil or skidje for shoes, no matter how you spell them, contain the J sound. The question of the letter J is settled for a lot of today's authorities on the Welsh language. The compilers of the Geiriadur Prifysgol Cymru, which is like the Welsh equivalent of the Oxford English Dictionary, include Welsh J words in the dictionary, also noting that they are generally borrowed from the English language. And as a representation of historical and modern Welsh, it is important that those words be included because they are present in the reality of spoken and written Welsh. The letter J is also present in the alphabet that young people learn in school, and it's what you will learn as a second language learner. One place where there seems to be continued debate around a simple letter is online. And that's why I wanted to make this video, to add some nuance and some actual historical sources to the conversation. I hope you've enjoyed this really interesting look into the Welsh language, starting, of course, with the surname Jones and its internet controversy. And if you are interested in learning more, all of the resources that I used for this video are listed in the description below. Some are in Welsh, others are in English, and a couple are, unfortunately, behind a paywall. But definitely check them out if you're a nerd like me. Thank you to White Light for their monetary support on this video. If you want to support Welsh history and genealogy resources online, you can help support my work on the Substack newsletter or here on YouTube as a member. Thanks, and have a great day.